The Zork games, a series of adventure games that primarily feature text instead of graphics, were notable for their extensive use of text commands as well as its storytelling and world building. As a result, it developed a following to the point of it transitioning to a fully graphical game in Return to Zork. In retrospect, it seems like the transition wasn't an easy one. While critical and commercial reception to Return to Zork and Zork Nemesis weren't exactly bad, one was considered unfairly and stupidly illogical, the other depressingly bleak and lacking in comical lightheartedness. Guess which one is which? Step in the release of the 1997 game Zork Grand Inquisitor, which essentially remains to this day the final game in the Zork series. Anyone who's played a Zork game will recognise the tone and settings, but the story is thankfully standalone, taking place between Zork Nemesis and Return to Zork on the timeline. The Grand Inquisitor Yannick has an evil intent, and it's simple: to get rid of magic.
Shun magic, and shun the appearance of magic. Shun everything, and then shunning.
You, the player, arrive in the recently liberated Port Fuzul to find a lantern that contains the trapped soul of the former Dungeon Master Dalbos. With his help and a spellbook, it is up to you to restore magic to the great underground empire. Just be careful of dangers, and especially the Inquisition, lest you want your soul to be sealed for eternity at a totem, similar to Dalbos being in a lantern. Ouch! Totemization. Not a pleasant way to go. The aforementioned tone and setting from previous Zork games are more prevalent in this game than in Zork Nemesis. The jokes, whether they are dialogue or visual gags, are goofy, ridiculous, and absurd. Plus, the staples and cliches of adventure games are referenced and parodied. It is a matter of taste, which makes the series stand out, but this game is undeniably funny.
Curfew will begin in 1 second. Curfew! Curfew has begun. Curfew began 1 second ago. Curfew began 5 seconds ago.
Perma-suck from Phobos Electric. We don't make things that suck, we make things that suck permanently.
Themes that existed in past Zork games make their return. For White House, Grooves, don't forget to light up dark areas, Throwbots, Flood Control Dam 3, even Zork Nemesis gets referenced. As with all graphical Zork games, purists may take issue with the text descriptions being depicted the way they are, as if it's a book to film adaptation. But this is a good looking game. The live action sections are good too, and are of course funny, and not as blurry as before, but the pixelation, almost regardless of which computer you're running the game on, does show the constraints of the software rather than unfortunately work with them. You may recognise the talents featured to the live action segments and voiceovers, and very likely find them over the top. Overall, the presentation is good, complete with a musical score that, while not necessarily as atmospheric as Zork Nemesis, is well composed and complimentary, with the tune for the Crossroads deserving special mention. Also, there is closed captioning, thank goodness. But can one say thank goodness for the gameplay? Well, first of all, the controls are almost exactly the same as seen previously. You move the on-screen cursor to the left or right to pan and interact with whatever is in your vicinity, provided you can. Yes, it can be a bit hard to tell what you can interact with or where you can move, and it can be a bit hard to get used to. Hopefully you won't get dizzy even when you adjust the panning of the game preferences. But it worked in Zork Nemesis, and it works here, so pretty much anyone can understand it. But several of the puzzles may not be understandable, and it's not necessarily just because of a fantastical setting. Puzzles towards the game's beginning are fairly simple and contain little to no frustration regardless of trial and error, but they could potentially make you pull your hair out in the later sections. Even with clues, you may still have trouble using logic and connecting the dots, and when you complete a puzzle, you may exclaim, "That's what I had to do?" Places such as the Spell Lab come to mind. Plus there's backtracking involved, where it turns out you couldn't do something unless you had a certain item or spell. Well, speaking of spells, the puzzle solving isn't all bad. The spells you utilize after fighting scrolls of them to put in your spellbook are so whimsical, right down to the chanting of the spell, or the effects they have, such as making purple fiends invisible. Purple? But that's the same colour of my hearing aid molds at the time of this review. There is apparently a 2-player mode where another person via the net or modem, how old is this game again? Points out areas and items of interaction. But how is that different from having someone sit beside you to join you on your adventure, while possibly being stuck in a lantern? Perish that thought. The gameplay is easy to get to grips with, but the puzzle solutions may have you reaching for a walkthrough. It has to be said, It can be quite humorous when you struggle or muck around with the puzzles. That Dow boss will suddenly speak from a lantern when it seems like something's not working.
That was fun. Useless, but fun.
Or if you're milliseconds away from dying.
What exactly was the thought process involved in that decision?
When and if you die, you see a text description similar to past Zork games, and the way those descriptions are written are just so absurd and goofy you can't help but chuckle, or be bemused perhaps. Is this a fun game? Well, it is, though that is probably more so due to the humour and whimsical tone and story, which are mostly worth getting the game for. You'd think that's a pretty vague reason to purchase a computer game, in regards to several of the puzzle solutions and even the game's fairly short length. Still, the production values are nice in spite of the game's age. Some of the puzzles are quite fun to figure out, especially those that involve casting spells, and the story is a simple yet compelling one that can potentially put a smile on the face of anyone familiar with the Zork games. Is this game more so for those into the Zork series then? Maybe, but the game's light-hearted nature may be just what you're looking for. The game's controls and premise are good for the non-gamer crowd, except they may want to look up the puzzle solutions. Anyone who's up for a fun and fantastical adventure game, or interested in adventure games in general, should give this game a go, with the GOG/Good Old Games release being your best bet. It's sad to think that this is the last Zork game. People who have played the games like myself will never forget the White House and the magic and so on. There may never be another adventure game where the main character you get to play as is yourself. And by yourself, I mean ageless, faceless, gender-neutral, culturally ambiguous adventure person. Or Affenkarp for short. Oh, that's what Dalbos calls you. Maybe another time, Dungeon Master.